he says, I need you to do this, you go, well, I've got this condition. He goes, no conditions. If you're going to follow me, you just follow me. Do we say, okay, Lord, I'm going to follow you? The key word or the key term in this section is going to be the word follow. You want to write that down. The word follow, and you want to underline that every time we come to it, will mean to accompany, especially as a disciple, So we're talking about discipleship here. We're not talking about heaven and hell, just being a disciple, not being a disciple. First one, verse 57. And as they were going along the road, now pay attention, they were going along the road. That'll be important for us. Someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, well, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So you have this first person, and it says, I'll follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says what he says. The first thing I just want to highlight, it says, while they were on the road. That means that they're not in Capernaum at home. That'll be important for our story. Well, we don't get a lot here, but in Matthew's gospel, he gives us a detail that helps to unlock what's going on. So in Matthew's gospel, it says it like this. Then a scribe, underline that, came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Now, what we might not know is Matthew tells us that this guy is a scribe. And if you were a scribe in Israel 2,000 years ago, that was a very respected position, occupation. You might say it was glamorous. Everybody would look at you like you're somebody special. And you would be paid very well, so you would live very comfortably. And you would go home every night to the same house. So being a scribe might be hard, but it wasn't hardship. It was a very glamorous, it was a very cushy lifestyle. So Jesus here, when he says, I don't have a place to lay my head, he's saying, following me isn't always comfortable. It's not always glamorous. Will you still follow me when it's no longer glamorous, if you're not always respected? So write this down. A disciple has to count the cost. So will you do that, when it's difficult and it's not comfortable anymore? And we'll come back to that. Well, two things I wanted to highlight here. First of all, when it says that Jesus, he's out on the road, means he's not in Capernaum. People will say that this verse, when Jesus says foxes have holes and birds have nests, that means that Jesus was homeless. No, Jesus is on the road. He lived in Capernaum. He had a house in Capernaum. They just didn't have Holiday Inns in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, and so you didn't always know where you were going to stay. Other people will take that and they'll say Jesus was poor, homeless and poor. Well, that's not true either, because if you just go down to verse 52, he says he sent messengers on ahead of him, and then when they entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him, they went in to rent a place for Jesus. They had the money. The money wasn't the issue. They were just rejecting him because he was going to Jerusalem. So Jesus was not poor and he was not homeless. Well, going on. The next one, the first story, the man comes to Jesus. The second story, Jesus calls this man. And so the second story, we pick it up in verse 59, verse 15. I'm on the wrong page here. Verse 59, he said to another, follow me. Now here Jesus is calling him, but he said, Lord, permit me to first go and bury my father. But he said to him, allow the dead to bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God. So I'll give you the punchline, then we'll unpack it. Following Jesus is not a someday decision. So he said to another, follow me. Jesus is giving the invitation to this man. Very different than the first one. And he said, Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father. So here's what you need to know. The father is not dead. The father is alive. Jewish people in those days buried on the same day, usually within 2 hours. So if the father had just died, the man would not be there talking to Jesus. He'd be at the funeral. So the man has not died. But here, Jesus makes the invitation to this man, and he says, follow me. when Jesus says, follow me, write this down. This man is called into what we would call full-time ministry. The other guys come to Jesus and say, we'll follow you, but this is when Jesus says, I'm asking you, follow me. So what's going on here? Well, he wants to follow Jesus, but he wants to wait till his dad dies. Most suggest, and I agree with this, that in that culture, what took place, in that culture, write this down, when the dad died, the inheritance was given. The inheritance was given. So most hold that what he's saying here is, I want to follow you, but I want to wait till I get my inheritance when my dad dies. In essence, what he's saying, write this down, I will follow you when I'm financially secure. When I'm financially secure. He's thinking, I want to be financially independent. I don't want to be a burden on the ministry. So he says, when my dad dies, that's when that takes place. He doesn't mean it, but here's what he's saying. Write this down. He says, I'll follow when it doesn't require faith. When it doesn't require faith. It says, I'll be set up. It won't be a burden on the ministry. The problem is that Jesus isn't calling him in the future. Jesus is calling him now. And so it's great if you can become financially independent and serve the Lord, but if Jesus is calling you now, you need to respond now, not later on. So most hold that. Well, the third one, verse 61 and 62, another one said, I will follow you, Lord, but first permit me to say goodbye to those at home. But Jesus said to him, no one after putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. We'll talk about that. Here's the lesson. Jesus says, the guy says, I'll follow you, but let me first. Write this down. A disciple follows or serves Jesus with no conditions. With no conditions. When we add conditions to our serving, even very small conditions. As a matter of fact, you want to go ahead and write down, even with small conditions, then what we're doing is we're saying, I'll serve you, but here's my condition, and all of a sudden it's now on my terms, not your terms. So a disciple just says, okay, Lord, however you want me to do that. When somebody adds conditions, they say, I'll serve, but I'll only serve it this way. I'll serve with this, but they add all these conditions. We always try to accommodate here at Calvary, but that's not a disciple. A disciple serves with no conditions. Whatever you want me to do, Lord, that's what I'm going to do. Now, the Living Bible adds this, and he says, another said, yes, Lord, I will come, but first let me ask permission of those at home. So it's suggested that he wanted to get permission from the family, but the calling doesn't wait till you get permission. Verse 62, I like how the NIV says it. I'll just read it from the NIV. He says, Jesus replied, no one puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Here we're talking about discipleship. We're not talking about going to heaven, going to hell, not fit for service in the kingdom of God. So if you can't serve and let go of the conditions, then you can't really serve in the kingdom. And that's what he's saying. Well, did I put you to sleep yet? Okay. Let's try this. So, did you notice? We went through 3 very quick stories, and not one time were we told how the person responded to the calling. So the first one, Jesus says, the foxes have holes and the birds have nests, but I don't have anywhere to lay my head. So here's the question. Did the guy go, well, if it's not going to be comfortable, I'm not going to serve? Or did the guy go, okay, I'm still going to follow you? We don't know. We're not told. And then the second one, did you notice, the guy says, let me go bury my father. Jesus says, no, you go preach the gospel. Did the guy go, no, I'm going to go bury my father. I'm going to do that first. I'm going to get the inheritance. Or did he go, all right, Jesus, if you say go, then I'm going to go do that. Or the third one, let me go home and say goodbye, get permission. And Jesus says, no, you need to go do this. Did the guy go, no, I'm going home. I'm going to go, that's what I'm going to do. Or did the guy say, okay, Jesus, I'm going to do what you said to do. But you notice that we're never told how they responded. So you want to know why I think that we're never told why they responded? I think we're not told how they responded so that we could put ourselves in that situation, and we could ask that question. We could answer that question. What about when he says, I'm calling you now? Do we say, okay, you're calling me now. I'm going to follow you. Or if he says, I need you to do this, you go, well, I've got this condition. He goes, no conditions. If you're going to follow me, you just follow me. Do we say, okay, Lord, I'm going to follow you? Or do we go, no, Lord, I'm only serving you with these conditions, and I'll stipulate that. When we serve with stipulations, it's on our terms, not his. You can't be a disciple and do that. So it's good questions for us to ask ourselves, and we get to place ourselves and decide how we would answer those questions.